Hello! If you remember last video on the topic immune, you might remember that we mentioned the whole immune system, the innate and adaptive system, mentioned in this book, Immune, A Journey into the Mysterious System That Keeps You Alive, by Philip Detmer. In the following series, we're still going to talk about this, at least for 10 episodes. But for today, we're going to give an introduction on innate and adaptive immune system and the big topic, the acid layer of the skin. Now, first of all, the innate immune system and the adaptive immune system. What is it really? Well, innate immunity was thought to be first and foremost kind of defense. In a nutshell, it is a non-specific defense system involving phagocytes, mast cells, dendritic cells, and more. If a pathogen attacks you, they are the first to arrive. Now, first of all, innate immunity. If we remember last video's story on billions of years ago, we remember that the single-cell organisms began to first appear. And they fought for environment, energy, resources, and more. In order to do that, they have to defeat each other so they can kill their competitors. But how? Chemical warfare. Chemical warfare is basically using chemical weapons and also biological weapons. For example, phagocytes. Phagocytes are literally eating people. They engulf other cells, including pathogens nowadays, to protect us. And before, this was also thought to be a defense. Now, we're going to look at this again. Well, in a nutshell, it's a non-specific defense system. It also includes lots of other cells. Now, you might hear me mentioning phagocytes, mast cells, and dendritic cells a lot of times in this video and lots of following videos. So we're going to give an introduction on all of them. First of all, phagocytes. As you can see here in this diagram, innate immunity. Phagocytes are actually a big group, including monocytes and macrophages. The basic principle is that macrophages engulf others, eat them. Here, if we can look here in this immune book, we can actually see part of them doing the jobs. Macrophages. The macrophage is a very important type of cell since, well, basically it's very big and also very important. It patrols your blood and other systems in order for you to survive. Right here. Now, as I said, engulfing is a hard job because basically this is actually a physical or physics factor here. Do you see the pathogens here or bacteria? This is a very common soil bacteria. And here, the macrophages are trying to eat them. However, they have trouble doing so. And why is that? Well, because they know the macrophages are going to eat them if they invade their bodies. They have to develop a pretty clever system. Macrophages and other cells are either negative. Most of the time they're just positive. So, as you know, magnets, if we use the same charge, they repel each other. So, exactly, the bacteria uses sometimes positive, sometimes negative charge on their skin, or their outer skin, as said, like an envelope we talked about in the last video. So basically, if they try to engulf them, they can't. And however, we're going to discuss this later, but antibodies, a special kind of protein, helps them by making them, for example, a negative bacteria and negative macrophage. We have a positive antibody. For that, it means they can attract each other. The macrophage gets attracted to antibodies, and on their lipped is the bacteria. Voila. Now, the mast cells. Mast cells are here is eosinophils, mast cells, basophils. These are all allergy and parasite fighters. We will not mention lots of this in this video, but mast cells is important for inflammation. Next video is going to talk about inflammation. Very important for our body. And finally, the dendritic cells, or our intelligence officers. Right here in the cover of this book, here you can see this is a cartoonic dendritic cell. The dendritic cell's main purpose is to bring samples of bacteria to your lymph nodes, or your highway system of the immune system, the lymphatic system. Now, in there, this is a very complicated process, but in a nutshell, the dendritic cells tries to find the exact same helper T cell, this is another type of adaptive immunity cell, and then match the bacteria to it. If it is the right helper T cell, they get activated and activate more cells, and so on. Now here, as we can see in this rusty pin diagram, we can give a conclusion of this finally. Imagine, you're walking in the woods, without your shoes of course. Without your shoes and you step on a rusty nail. It hurts a bit, but it's okay for you, right? You keep on walking. However, inside your cell skills, this is basically a full-on alien invasion. Here, the rusty pin pierces the skin along with, for example, toxic chemicals and also, most important, bacteria. Here, the blood starts to flow out, but the main part is here that the bacteria is trying to get inside the new home. Two different types of innate immune cells starts first, the neutrophils and macrophages. The neutrophils are suicide warriors. They use chemical warfare. They basically also, like the macrophage, engulfs bacteria. However, if it's very important, if there's so much bacteria and other times passengers around, they literally explode themselves into a net, which is basically a neutrophil DNA net. Basically, it just uses its body to trap all the bacteria inside and melt it. And even after that, sometimes they can still fight. This is an innate immune system. Now we move on to the far, far more complex adaptive immune system. Adaptive immunity is far more complex than innate immunity. What makes it special is that for every pathogen, past, present, and future, of every possibility, there's already a cure for all of them inside our bodies right now. The main players are B cells, T cells, and antibodies. If you scratch yourselves, they arrive a day or two later if your innate immunity can't handle it. Now, you might say, how can we have every cure for every possible pathogen? Well, this is due to our library. Well, this is not a real library. Basically, our body is so evolved that it made sure to use different kinds of protein to make every kind of possible bacteria. Now, for example, imagine if you were a cook. Now, imagine you have to serve up to billions and billions and billions of dishes for billions and billions of dinner guests. However, if even one of them can't match the correct dinner guest, instead of giving you a bad complaint of your restaurant, they'll shoot you in the face. So, to prevent that to happen, you get lots of dishes. For example, carbohydrates, meat or protein, and also vegetables. You have lots of vegetables, 50 or so, 6 meat, and also 20 or so carbohydrates. First of all, you're going to have to mix the main ingredients. You make every ingredient after that. But however, once you get the final answer, you try to mix them up a little. You add a little, you replace a little, and you also cut down a little. So in this way, basically, you can end up billions of dishes. But however, in the end, you have to refine it into a final dish. So you take each of them and try to make them final for every dinner guest. After a dinner guest starts to arrive, they start to match them up. And after that, the possibility starts to grow. And in the end, every dinner guest gets what they want. This is basically what your body does. uses proteins, mix them all together to create every kind of possibility of every bacteria, pathogen, virus, protist, fungi, every kind of possibility inside there already. If the Black Death Plague, we already have it. Coronavirus pandemic, we already have it. Future plague or future fungi infection on Mars, already have it. That is how crazy your adaptive immune system is. And what's even crazier is that actually B cells, T cells, they all have, again, exact replications. So that's why I said dendritic cells has to match the correct helper T cell, a kind of T cell, to actually match them. After that, the helper T cell can go on to activate more of them, the B cells. Now, we're going to have a separate video on B cells and T cells. However, in a nutshell, B cells are antibody producers. Now, first of all, there are a few biological terms you have to first talk about. Antigens, antibiotics, and also finally, antibiotics, antigens, antibodies. Yes, that's all of them. Well, these three are all very different. Antigens are basically proteins to show who you are. And then antibodies, what we're talking about here, are very special weapon proteins. They can stick to bacteria like little pincer claws. And also, they can disable and clump them up together, just like the macrophage does here. Clump them up. Eat them up. Now finally, what is antibiotic? Antibiotics are basically treatments for bacteria. Now this won't work for viruses, so basically antibodies are the vaccines of bacteria. Pills, all of them. These are all for bacteria. Not going to explain this a lot here in this video. Okay, now, finally, we enter the acid layer of the skin. The skin has three layers, main layers. The epidermis, a barrier of dead cells and immune centrals. The dermis, with collagen, nerves, and glands. And the hypodermis, a fat-storing cushion. Together, they block pathogens, sense threats, and regulate temperature, acting as the body's front-line defense. Now here, we can see the epidermis and the dermis. Here, there's also the acid mantle. We're going to take a look at that first. And then here, we have, to you Star Wars fan who knows this is the Death Star. The Death Star is basically a machine that is as big as the moon and is capable of destroying an entire planet with a single blast of this ray here. This is created in Star Wars by George Lucas, which is a movie about wars and galaxies far, far away. And this was basically made by a fictional character called Darth Vader. Now, here, why am I putting this inside here? Is a contrast. They're very similar, actually. Now, first of all, the acid mantle. The acid mantle, as you can hear, is real acid. Well, technically, it's not like very sulfuric acid and others, but it's a type of very low acid. However, high enough to give the bacteria a very bad time. Imagine if you're a bacteria. So, the acid mantle is basically like the human's bed. If your bed has battery acid all covered over it and stomach acid, you sleep on it. You woke up one day and your skin has all disintegrated into nothing and bits of your organs are all disappeared. Some of you might survive, but still give you a very, very hard time to live. And this is basically a real acid, kind of trying to disintegrate your bacteria. Now, this is just the very top layer, but it also includes tribal bacteria hordes. As you can see here, these little dots here are not sweat. These are bacteria. These bacteria are neutral, sometimes even help our bodies. But simply, they just stand, for example me, they stand on my skin and take up space, so that no other bacteria or viruses can actually take up the space so they can get into my skin and infect me. Now, after this, we have a very interesting fascia, dead skin cells, and also live skin stem cells. The dead skin cells, how can you know that? Well, to be scientifically speaking, you're dead on the outside. So am I. What you're looking at me right now is basically a dead version of me. Right now, a millimeter down my skin is the real live me. This is just actually a layer of dead skin. Every hour or so, you can have millions of dead skin cells coming up from the body. That's why sometimes you can see the white stuff. These are our skin cells. But about 60 skin cells down, we reach the real ones, the live stem cells. Stem cells basically reproduce a lot and a lot and a lot. So every time, basically every few seconds or so, they bump up another live cell up above until they get squished into a dead layer. And then eventually they'll get pop up off our skin and just move away. So it won't be denser. And also here, if we look at the dermis is also where our nerve cells reside. The nerve cells are basically cells that can feel. The neuron cells connected in the brain. This is the most complex, before the immune system, the most complex structure maybe in the whole universe. The nervous system and our brain. Very, very important. So basically the nerve cells sense, traveling up the information that we get into our brain. Our brain finds, oh, what is this? And then gives a message, oh, this is sweat, or this is blood, or this is pus, and others. Now, finally, the immune cells. How does this matter? Well, basically, the skin is also part of the immune system. It guards us. It's like a living shield that guards ourselves from other bacteria. And even if they get inside, they have to face the real immune system. Most of them, even if they get inside, they're immediately wiped out. So our whole body is very sterile. The assembly of the skin and the dermis, the skin cells are already a lot of tough foes for bacteria and viruses.